This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and I'd like to welcome you to Fair Game. Abraham Lincoln, in many ways, is the most human of our presidents. His reputation for integrity that caused him to be known as Honest Abe, his ability to tell a humorous story, the numerous quotes that have worked themselves into the warp and woof of our culture make him much more accessible to us than President Washington, who seems to be the marble man. Lincoln is the most human man. You might wonder, now that we are more than a century and a half from the Civil War, what his ongoing value is to us today. What is his relevance? What difference does it make that Lincoln lived? I'm going to argue this from a different point than you might normally hear it. Of course, Lincoln saved the Union. And I think the failures he experienced in life, the loss that he experienced, gave him a spine of steel that when the Union Army was rolling up defeats, he just was going to stay the course. And that certainly is part of what we have to learn from him, that when things are really going bad, you have to stay with your mission. But there's another part of Lincoln that has always fascinated me, and it was his capacity for growth. Now, Lincoln was born on the Kentucky frontier to a father who might have been able to read a little bit, but who certainly had no interest in books. His mother died when he was 9 years old. He and the father never really did get along very well. Lincoln inherited the prejudices and the viewpoints of his time, including his view of African Americans. Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist of the Civil War era, said that he doubted whether Lincoln was very committed to abolition. And Lincoln himself once said that if I could win the war and not free any of the slaves, I would do so. And if I could free some and leave some in slavery, I would do so. And if I must free them all, I will do so. So there was a pragmatic streak in him that, from a certain perspective, is not very attractive. But Lincoln seemed to have a capacity for growth. You see it in the young boy who was constantly reading. He devoured books. As a young man, he discovered Euclid's geometry. Now, that is not exciting reading. It certainly doesn't read like a novel, and it doesn't read like a good story. It is a set of principles. But Abraham Lincoln practically memorized Euclid's principles, and they helped form the structure of his mind, the way that he approached a problem. It sharpened his capacity for analysis. Lincoln took a trip down the Mississippi on a flatboat when he was 21 years old. And when he got to New Orleans, he saw the slave pens. For the first time in his life, he saw men and women and children walking through the streets in shackles. He saw them sold. And it had a powerful influence on Lincoln. When he was in the White House, he said that he doesn't recall a time when he was not opposed to slavery, that in his soul he always believed it was wrong. And if you watch the Lincoln of the presidency, he seems to move from simply trying to save the Union, which as chief executive was his responsibility, to what he called a new birth of freedom. For Lincoln, the war represented a new chapter in American history, what some historians have called the second founding. And with the 13th Amendment that abolished slavery, Lincoln showed a commitment to the dignity and freedom of all people, regardless of their race or their previous condition. But what you see as you watch him pass through the war is he almost becomes the theologian of the American Republic. There is no president in our history, and hardly any writer, who saw the war more clearly in moral terms. The message he sent to Congress in December of 1862, which was his annual address. Presidents didn't start going up to the Hill for State of the Union until quite a bit after that. They would send up the message and the clerk would read it to the members. Mr. Lincoln came near the conclusion, and he said, "We will either nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of man." What do we need in public leadership today? Whether it's on a school board or a town council or a state legislature or Congress, I would suggest that it is people who have Lincoln's sense of balance between the practical realities that they face and a broad vision of who we are as a people and what we can become. But I would suggest something else. Lincoln lived in a time where it was common for the northern population to blame everything that happened on the South, the rebels, as they called them. And it was common in the South to blame the war on Yankee abolitionists. In Mr. Lincoln's second inaugural address, he traces how the war came. And what is most striking about that speech, which is certainly one of the finest inaugural addresses in the history of this country, he simply describes in almost lawyerly legal fashion a particular issue, and then he would say, "And the war came." He didn't say Southern fire eaters caused it. He didn't blame it on abolitionists. He didn't blame it on anybody. He simply said, this is the situation, and as a result of that situation, the war came. We live in a time where it is popular to blame the other side for everything, including the kidnapping of the Lindbergh baby. It is popular to demonize one's opponents. Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, was very good at that, as were many of his colleagues. Lincoln never did it. He talked about the better angels of our natures, not just the better angels of the northern people's nature, but of all Americans. He had this wonderful capacity to see the good in everybody. Now, maybe that sounds a little esoteric. Maybe it sounds a little bit naive. But we have big issues facing us as a country, and some of them are pretty divisive. And on both sides, people hold their position based on moral certitude, and they have a tenacity of purpose when it comes to where they are. I wonder if it's possible to look for the best in our fellow Americans, to realize that they love their children as much as we do, that they have dreams that are as valued to them as ours are to us. February is the month of President's Day, and it's always a time of the year that I think a lot about the people who have served in the White House. But whenever I think about the presidency and I think about the role of a president, it is the role to challenge us to be our best selves. My good friend, Mr. Lincoln, did that in a wonderful way. And when I get to heaven, I want to shake his hand. And I'd like to sit around a Cracker Barrel and listen to old Abe tell stories. For me, that really would be heaven. This is Dr. Gary Kellner, and this is Peer Game.